are quite minimal compared to the cost of the projects that we do, so that's why the bulk of the fees are collected into operating and then transferred over to capital. Next slide, please. A little bit of legislation that governs how we implement water and wastewater rates. Of course, Proposition 218, which we went through in the 2022 utility rate study to do the required public noticing and public hearing process. Proposition 26, of course, again, that the fees cannot exceed the cost of the service and the town cannot make profit. And then Government Code 6600, which is more applicable to the impact fees. So that's relative to the current impact fee study that we are going through right now with Bartle Wells and Associates that you heard about recently at a council meeting. Next slide, please. And a quick overview of how utility rates and utility funds are doing. So we have moved out of our drought conditions and but still promote conservation, water conservation for environmental reasons. And though less water use can translate into lower revenue for the funds. So that's kind of the offset. We do hope that people use less, but that does mean less revenue for the water fund. Water operating fund is estimated to end the current year in a deficit, which is why it's not able to contribute to the water capital fund. And this is the product of high water cost in 2019, I believe, where we went offline with the Rector Reservoir and had to buy from City of Napa, which is a much higher cost. And that really ate up a lot of fund balance in the water utility fund and caused it to go into a deficit. The wastewater operating fund, conversely, is estimated to end with a positive fund balance and will be able to contribute to the two capital funds, as well as meet the emergency operation reserve target established in the utility rate study, which is 30% of operating expenditures. And then most recently, the Town Council did establish the General Fund Supported Utility Enterprise Capital Projects Restricted Fund with a balance of $1.65 million, and that will help finance future utility capital projects, which did in turn help alleviate the burden on ratepayers so that the rate increase was less, and we could use this funding for that 5-year capital improvement plan.
And what fund number is that?
Is it 06? 06, yes. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a familiar slide. We've seen this before, and this is touching on some of the expenses that affect all operating funds. So we wanted to show this one more time because this does affect water and wastewater operating, and so you will see allocations of these costs in the line items as you do your review. PERS cost, which is the normal payroll contributions, as well as the annual UAAL payment. The 4.6% COLA for the next fiscal year, which will be represented in salary costs. The two trust contributions, which are allocated to in the personnel costs, and also liability workers' compensation, and also property insurance premiums are allocated into these operating funds. Next slide, please. Okay, so starting with a snapshot of water utility revenue, expenditures, and transfers. And this is all funds. So this is Fund 61, which is operating, 60, which is utility capital, and 61, which is water operating. So this is the aggregate of those funds combined. As you can see, expenditures are outpacing revenues, which has been a fairly consistent trend in the last couple of years. And also you'll notice in the interfund transfers down at the bottom, operating is not transferring into capital. You will also see the transfer into Capital Fund 60, the $888,000 that Town Council approved to come from the general fund unassigned fund balance into Fund 60 to pay off the interfund loan that it had from the drought reserve, which then fully repaid the drought reserve fund. Also in transfers next fiscal year, we're estimating an increase, hoping that more customers will utilize the low income subsidy that Council increased to $50 a month for eligible customers. Next slide, please. And this is a graphical representation of the previous slide where you can see the blue line, which is the expenditures, outpacing the red line, which is the revenues. It looks like they're starting to align a little bit better. It's the hope that the new rates will help close or at least narrow that gap as we move through the 5-year rate schedule. Next slide, please. Okay, another view of the water utility expenditures in a categorical chart. And you can see the increase or decrease, and this is being compared to the prior year adopted, so that 22-23 budget column. So it's looking at that. An overall reduction in expenditures of about 4%. That asterisk there by the water purchases, just wanted to point out that this is, of course, an estimated cost of water purchases. And the way that works is that each year we estimate what we think the cost will be, but we don't truly know until we do the wastewater true-up process at the end of the fiscal year. Starts in July and usually is finalized by September. Most of the reason is because Veterans Home has to obtain information from the state to finalize all their expenditure costs. And so we won't really know the true cost of water for 22-23 until September of 2023. So this is really our best guesstimate at this point. Next slide, please. Moving into water operations.
So water operations, this is the receiving the water from Calvet and then distributing it, and then also includes operation of the municipal well. So ultimately the total expenditure is going to be around $770,000. The highlights include $35,000 in contract services for laboratory testing. That's up a little bit from last year because CalTest's costs have increased similarly to all costs across everything. And then we have budgeted $30,000 for on-call water service repair. So if our water system breaks in dramatic fashion, we have an on-call contract with several contractors, and we can call them in to perform the emergency repair because our water department consists really of one person supported by the wastewater utility. So in order to exact repairs on a broken water line quickly and easily, we call it a contractor. So that $30,000 is available. Hopefully we won't use it. Hopefully we won't have water leaks. And then again, the $6,000 from general fund is the subsidy for the low-income resident program. Next slide, please. Water purchases and conservation. So we spent a lot of time on conservation the last 2 years. As the council now knows, the 400 acre-foot limitation has been lifted, so we do have access to the full 500 acre-feet of water. However, we are encouraging conservation, and we believe that conservation will be in place because we saw such a great change in our water customers over the last 2 years that I think that's going to carry over. The largest expense in this budget is the water purchase, and it's mostly driven by the cost of Calvet water. We also have access to City of Napa water. It's 25 acre-feet, so it's a very small portion of our available access. And based on that price, we only use that water in emergencies. So we try not to run the Napa connection unless we absolutely have to. The most recent incident was when Calvet sent us brown water, and we were able to turn the Calvet supply off. We turned Napa water on while we flushed the system. And so there'll be a minor City of Napa cost, but we try to minimize that use as much as we can.
So this is a history of the cost per acre foot water purchase cost, and as you can see, it's very volatile. It really depends on their actual costs for running the Rector Reservoir, and so it may look like the 22-23 estimate is quite high. However, we won't really know until September. Hopefully it comes in a little bit lower. That's always the hope. And we shall see. And typically in October, we come back with a report to Town Council of the results of the true-up.
Back to, this is Water Utility Capital Improvements Fund. We have a short list in the Water Capital Improvement Project Program because of the deficit between revenues and expenses. So we minimize the amount of projects that we're actually going to do. The two projects that are scheduled that are for this coming year, one of them is a recurring one that we schedule, which is $30,000 for hydrant repair and replacement. We schedule that periodically as the fire hydrants need to be repaired and replaced over time, so we have a schedule of replacement. The other one that is a one-time thing is $65,000 budgeted for water system intertie projects. That's specific to our connection to the City of Napa water system. So I think, as council knows, City of Napa has a water line that runs through town. We have a connection at Washington and Weber that needs some backflow upgrades to it, so this encompasses that. And then we have a dysfunctional or non-functional intertie located at Mulberry and Washington, and given that location in the middle of town, we don't want to expand that to make it functional, so we're going to abandon that one, and then we are proposing to create a new one down at the south parking lot, where that, for those of you that have been to the south parking lot, there's a City of Napa fire hydrant that's in the middle of the dirt there. So that would be that location would be our other backup intertie.
Okay. Drought Reserve Fund. Again, this interfund loan to the Water Capital Fund was paid off by council action back in October. And that brings this fund back up to its estimated balance of a little over $2 million, which is what was the intended balance when this was established back in 2009, I believe.
Yes.
So it will continue to grow in fund balance as it receives quarterly interest, and will be available for use if needed. No planned usage otherwise. Water connection impact fees. Again, we've talked about impact fees before, how we don't practice budgeting them each year because it can be hard to predict. They are tied to development, and it is never known what developments will be coming forward in the next fiscal year. So we do not budget for them. If we do receive some revenue, that will be transferred into the Water Utility Capital Improvements Fund to be a funding source for the projects that Director Ferns was just explaining. Sorry, interim town manager.
Is that what you got?
Question?
Yep. Okay. So, any questions on any of these 6 funds for now? Councilmember Reeves?
I just have one question, and it probably has to do more with the contract with the Veterans Home. We pay for our own system, our water delivery system. What happens when they feel the urge to improve their delivery system and their, dam, all of that kind of work? Do we then pay a portion of that?
We do. So similar to the agreement that we have with them, and they pay 50% of our wastewater treatment capital projects, we pay a portion of their capital projects. So typically if they have something big on their horizon, they let us know what that is, and they amortize it over, I think the last one was over 20 years. So we pay a portion each year of our share of that capital.
But they haven't said that they're about to do any projects?
I think there is one on the horizon that is approved, but kind of still in the works, hasn't really lifted off yet. I can get more information about that and just bring the council up to speed and maybe get a status of that project and when it might be started.
Thank you.
Councilmember McKee-Kent? Nothing? Councilmember Tripp?
Based on your discussion of the cost of water from Rector for this year, that the true-up has to occur at the end of the fiscal year, I'm assuming then we don't know what 23, 24 will be until that same process happens.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And then my other question, on the Water Drought Reserve Fund 57, is that only for purchasing water? It says on the spot market, which I'm guessing the spot market is basically Napa water? I'm just reading from the budget book summary. It says established by council to account for 2 million reserve for water purchases on the spot market in the event of a drought. So the spot market would really be Napa, right?
We would start with the city of Napa, but it could mean the state water project. So the state water project delivers water to Napa and a bunch of other water contractors in Northern California. If another contractor, not Napa, had some extra water that they were willing to sell to us, we could certainly purchase it. We do rely on the city of Napa for delivery of that water to our system, though.
And in terms of the nomenclature we use, is that a restricted fund or?
It is a restricted fund, and there is, in the fiscal policies area, there is the use of the drought water reserve fund policy, and it
Okay.
does outline some other uses. For example, that is why we were able to borrow from that fund to do an applicable water project.
Okay.
So there,
So that's actually described in our book.
that is in the
Okay.
fiscal
I'll
policies,
pull it out.
correct?
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
A couple of quick questions. Director, can you talk about that the Veterans Home has maybe a project involved with Rector? Do we know generally what type of work they plan to do, or the extent of that work?
I should. It's in my email.
Okay. It's just something
I believe it's a bypass project. So they are under orders from themselves, the state, to increase their ability to bypass water from the reservoir to Rector Creek for habitat purposes. And so it's a project related to improving their ability to bypass the obligatory water to the creek.
for the creek below the dam as a part
Correct.
of that.
Correct.
And kind of an extended lawsuit and things like that
Yes.
with water. Or with,
Correct.
Okay, I understand that. The other question I had was, when the water goes down, we buy water from when a line from Rector goes down, we buy water from the city of Napa, typically. What contract? Where does the Veterans Home? Do they tie into our purchase of City of Napa, or do they have a separate contract for the supply of their water?
They have a separate supply. They have a separate contract for City of Napa supply, I believe under emergency circumstances also. And they have a separate connection to their
separate
system,
connection.
independent of ours. So if Rector goes down and they can't provide water to themselves, they would also turn on their City of Napa connection.
Is that somewhere
independent
around?
of ours?
Is that somewhere around California Boulevard or something, where maybe a line goes north for us and turns and goes west for them, or something like that?
Their
or-
connection is in the vicinity of Washington and California, where their pump house is.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I have a question, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about just the history with the Drought Water Fund too. So what is going to be your plan related to the finances here about the well this year? Are we going to not run it like we did last year, is the question?
Our plan is to not run the well unless we need it, but we are running it, we are exercising it weekly so it's available in the event of emergency. But right now, we have no plans other than the weekly exercising of the well to keep the chemical levels up. We don't plan on using it as part of our water supply unless we need to.
Okay, thanks. And just back to the Drought Water Fund. This was, back when I first elected in '08, this was something that I encouraged the council to do, and I think it made sense. Back then, we were paying, it was a long time ago, over $300,000 a year to access water if we needed it from the State Water Fund. But you could only get that water if we only would probably need it in multiple dry years. And in multiple dry years, like we just went through, they only allocated maybe 5% of what you could get. So it just didn't seem to make financial sense, and luckily after all these years, we've been right so far. So we actually sold our rights to the city of Napa, and they gave us about $3 million, and we used about $1 million because we were in great deficit in some of the funds, and since it came out of the water funding, and then we put $2 million away for just this emergency, and we didn't need to tap into it, but $2 million won't last very long at all. So I don't know if you have a number, but I have a number in my head. If we really became, really dire, it's not a lot to buy money to buy water on the spot market. So I just thought I'd give you that background information. All right, any more questions as we go around? Nope, nothing to my left, to my right. Everybody's looking down, not at me. We have no more questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Wastewater Utility Enterprise Fund, Agenda Item 6C. Starting again with a snapshot of the revenue and expenditures. Same theme here. Expenditures are more than the proposed revenues. This is mostly due to large-scale planned projects, and also the spike in revenue is due to anticipated grants and some insurance reimbursement for the emergency recycled water transmission main repair project. You will see that Fund 62 is able to transfer out some money to support the capital funds, which is good. And also you'll see a transfer to debt service for the wastewater portion of the Madison Street repair project from 2013. Next slide, please. Same thing here, graphical representation of the revenues and expenditures. They're fairly closely aligned. Again, big spikes this year for anticipated grant revenue and large-scale projects. In future years, those probably will come back down a little bit more to what we have seen in the past, around the $3.5 million to $4 million range for expenditures. And then the expenditures by category. You can see there in the proposed column for capital outlay, again, there's the biggest spike in the expenditures are our projects that we are going to be moving forward with. And that is causing an overall increase of about 84% from the prior year budget. Next slide, please. Okay, so look.
Mayor, just one
Yes, go
question.
ahead.
In the aggregate fund summary page, just under that capital recovery, system replacement fees, that is a big jump from other years generally. Could you just remind me why there's a larger revenue in the proposed next year than in previous years? The $3,240,000.
Yes. Thank you, Vice Mayor Knight. That is misrepresented. So that is the aggregate of Fund 63. It should not say only system replacement fees, because that is the total of the system replacement fees, the anticipated grant funding, and the insurance reimbursement. So we can break that out better so that it looks a little more in line with historical. Okay. So we'll add some extra lines for Fund 63 to break out those different revenue sources.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit more information about transfers. Also on that aggregate page that we were just looking at, you will see that the transfers were reduced in the current fiscal year, and that is due to receiving less revenue in the prior fiscal year. And so it's applicable to the Veterans Home true-up. So each year we purchase water from the Veterans Home, but we don't actually pay the money. And we treat their wastewater, but we don't actually charge them. And then at the true up, we see who owes who. And so we anticipated a certain amount of revenue from the veterans home, and it didn't manifest because of the drought, because a lot of their wastewater runoff, I believe, is rainwater runoff. And so because of the drought, we had less of that flow coming into the treatment plant, which then reduced the amount that they were using the treatment plant. So the town actually was responsible for more of the cost. So because that revenue did not manifest as anticipated, and we had already adopted higher transfer amounts, we had to reel that back a little bit in the current fiscal year. And we're hoping that this fiscal year, with all the rainy season that we've had, that the revenues will come in a bit more aligned with what we were expecting, and we will be able to make the sizable transfer into capital in 23-24 that we are proposing.
Are you going to help us understand why so much is going down the
Yes.
wrong drain? Thank you.
So the sewer systems, when you own and operate a sewer systems, one of the challenges is called inflow and infiltration. And so sewer systems are a gravity system. They're not pressurized. So they're prone to groundwater pushing its way into the sewer system. And once it's in the system, in the pipes, it goes to the plant and gets treated. So one of the examples of the long list of deferred maintenance that's on the to-do list for the vet's home is their sewage collection system. So their wastewater collection system is in need of maintenance and repair, and absent that, they have a high volume of inflow and infiltration during a normal rainy season. So during the dry years that we experienced, the groundwater table went lower and we didn't have near as much surface rain, so we didn't see as much inflow and infiltration in the prior year as we normally would. And so based on the wet season that we just finished, we expect these numbers to go back up. But it's really based on their inflow and infiltration, their lack of, well, I shouldn't say lack of maintaining it. They're just, their system needs some deferred maintenance that hasn't occurred yet. And that's why you hear from us, we have a fairly robust inflow and infiltration program, because we're trying to reduce the amount of ground and rainwater that enters our system so we don't have to treat it.
So it would be correct to say that once they do work on their delayed infrastructure that they need to do, that these numbers will then go back down and set a new baseline.
Correct.
Any other questions, Vice Mayor?
So in some ways, that maybe our budget benefits by basically poor maintenance on their part for their system. I might be an interesting conversation at some point when we do a new contract with them down in a few years. But just generally, do we ever hear? I assume the solution for leaking, 80-year-old sewer pipes probably is sleeving. Do you know of? Do they have a program where they sleeve or do that type of maintenance to reduce? Because I assume the other challenge for us is high flow of water in the winter when I guess it's easier to release it to the Napa River, but you have challenges with flow through this whole system, I assume, in December and January sometime. So
Yes. So I'm not aware of a replacement program. I assume that they have one. I haven't had that conversation with them, and I'm not aware of any immediate or long-term plans to repair or do inflow and infiltration program type work. But you're correct that in our permit to operate the plant, and it's all across the state is like this, they give you a dry weather flow permit. And so we're permitted 500,000 gallons during dry weather flow to treat, and that's how our permit is regulated. But the Regional Water Quality Board and the plant operators know that number is going to jump up to 1.5 million gallons a day during a rainy season, because we get that much inflow and infiltration. The inflow and infiltration is a problem universal to anybody that owns and operates a sewer collection system. But we're fortunate that we have a small enough system, and we've done some pretty good maintenance on it that we have a better handle on ours than most, but I can't speak to the vet's home.
Thank you.
So one last question, with the new skilled nursing facility going in up there, what kind of estimation, up or down, if any, are you estimating for increased flow coming into the wastewater plant?
Right now, the understanding is Holderman Hall will be decommissioned, so we are trading like for like. So we have not had the conversation with them about both of those facilities being online at the same time. So up to right now, the understanding is the existing big building is going to go offline or is offline. The new big building is going to come online, and the flows will be comparable. And then if the older building gets used for something, then we need to have that conversation with them.
Okay, not till then. All right, great. Any other questions before we move on? Seeing none, let's keep going.
Okay.
So speaking of collections, I do want to make the distinction in that we do have two separate funds, or more than two, but we have separate funds for the town's collection system versus the town's treatment system. So on this particular slide, you see wastewater utility collection systems operation, and what that consists of is the gravity sewer system in the streets, all the way down to the pump station, to the force main, to the plant. So all of the funds associated for owning and operating that part of the system falls under collections, and then once the wastewater reaches the plant, we go into the other fund, which is the treatment fund. So this particular fund we've just increased the budget slightly for equipment maintenance based on our experience with the pumps, machineries, and motors that fall into that system. We are seeking to buy modern AED units for our wastewater locations, collection system locations. So we're budgeting for that. And then this one, because it's the collection system, also has the subsidy for the low-income residents program. And then, as just discussed, now we've left the force main and now we're in wastewater treatment. So this is really, where the wastewater treatment plant is. Total budget is $1.6 million. That first line is a little misleading, I think, because it's not an increase in the Napa sanitation contract. It's just an increase in the contract services line item to account for the money. So we're not increasing the Napa sanitation contract by $49,000. We're just recognizing that the contract services line item in this budget is including that value. The one big ticket, well, actually the two big ticket items this year are the cost of chemicals. Chemicals have gone up dramatically. We did budget for 53,000 $53,000 in the version of earlier versions of the budget for this year had $153,000 in it. This last week we got the actual pricing in for the chemicals via the shared services for the North Bay Agency's chemical pool, and our total amount is $177,000. So the proposed budget now has bumped up from the $155 to the $177. And then we are tracking our utilities and what they are costing us, and it's been more expensive over time, so we are trying to capture that cost in the budget. And then the other agencies line item that needs to increase by $8,500, the other agencies are fees for permits that we pay to agencies that regulate us for the various things that we do. The examples are the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and the NPDS, which is our national permit for the stormwater component of the treatment plant. So all of those have gone up slightly over time, so the number adds up to a larger number.
Just to add that the budget materials that you are looking at do not include these three increases, and so that will be part of the final proposed budget on June 6th. Sorry.
So getting into the capital recovery fund or the capital projects, we are actively pursuing funding from the USDA for a low-interest loan for $2 million for the Joint Treatment Plant Office Modernization Project. You've heard about this project over time. We've gotten the electrical system finally upgraded through PG&E, and now we're working through the final design issues and then trying to find our funding to do the actual project. The other anticipated item is the $1 million estimate for the recycled water transmission main repair. We think that will be an insurance reimbursement because the facility was insured, so we're working through that. And just quick status update, our contractor that we had on board to do the temporary repair failed to meet our contracting requirements or chose not to meet our contracting requirements. So we've moved on to Plan B. We met with that contractor this week and we're moving ahead. So the repairs, the temporary repair is still happening. The permitting portion of it is going along parallel with it. We haven't got the temporary repair in place, but we hope to have it in early June. And then for the other budget highlight is just a reminder that the Vets Home does share 50% of our project costs for facilities immediately within the footprint of the plant. So they don't share the cost of the collection system, but they share the cost for the wastewater treatment. Next slide, please. And this is, so that was treatment capital. This is collections capital. The biggest tool that we use, and you've seen it out on the streets, is what it's a Vactor. Vactor is a brand name, but it's like Kleenex. It's become known as the Vactor truck. But it's really the giant truck that we use to clean the sewer systems with, and certainly to clean up any sanitary sewer overflows. Our truck is in need of replacement, so the big ticket item on this particular one is the $400,000 budgeted for the new Vactor truck. And that's it. Next slide, please.
Okay, again, sewer connection impact fees, no revenue is anticipated for next fiscal year. Should any be collected, it will be transferred into the wastewater collections capital improvement fund 64 to help fund those projects.
Quick question. Sorry. So we are replacing the Vactor jet truck. So I assume just generally it's just we have that truck. Every system, wastewater system, has to have a truck like that. But if over the years with the work that staff has done in the community, are we able to use it less because you've addressed the fats, oils, and grease in the system? I just remember years ago that it seems like that truck was always out on the streets. I don't see it as often. So I would make sense that we have to have one, but it seems like we don't use it as often as we in the past. Or
you are correct. The fat, oil, grease program, which requires mostly the commercial restaurant users to have a grease interceptor on site to intercept the grease solids, the grease that becomes solids. They collect them on site, so it doesn't enter our system. So you don't see the truck in the streets as much because we've have that program in place and it's working. We do use the truck fairly frequently, both at the pump station, at the wastewater treatment plant, but it's traveling between the two, but you don't see it as often on the streets, but it does get used regularly at the pump station and the treatment plant.
Oh, I see. You're moving and cleaning at those points off
Yes,
out of
more
public
often.
eye.
Yes,
Because
correct.
when it's coming down to the Peter Barsono transfer station, you have to do some work there with the truck.
Occasionally, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
One more question about the truck. The $400,000, is that for a new truck or is that a used truck? Because it seemed like we have some used equipment as well. as new.
That's pricing for a new one.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And then in the capital budget or capital improvement program, we typically talk about projects, but we also have reoccurring things that we aren't a specific location, so we don't say it's a specific project, but it's a program for a specific thing. So the example is what we talked about a little bit ago, the inflow and infiltration reduction program. we identify places in the system that hasn't been cleaned or slip lined in years, and we will focus a contractor on those stretches of the sewer system to improve our inflow and infiltration. Likewise, we do set aside monies for sewer replacement and repair in the event that we have a sanitary sewer overflow or a failure with one of our systems. Similar with the other two things, the plant and the pump station are giant pieces of machinery, and they're very complicated, and they have lots of moving parts. And occasionally, in spite of your best efforts with maintenance, those things break or need repair. And so we do set monies aside to ensure that we have that available for when something needs to be fixed, because we can't stop either the pump station or the treatment plant from operating.
John, I have a question. It's back to the truck. Is that an asset that we could look at sharing with like St. Helena in the future? I mean, none of this is something that we can share, but if we have an asset that's mobile, is that?
It is something that we could share, and we do. In the event our current one needed service, so when it went in the shop for service, we called Napa Sanitation and said, hey, our truck is out of commission. Can your truck be available to us in case we have an emergency? And they said, absolutely. So we do have those conversations. I think all of the agencies up and down the valley currently have a version of a Vactor truck. And so it's challenging to share as a resource, because when you need them right now, and
right.
you usually need them when it's raining, and they need theirs when it's raining too. So it's a good thing to have solely for your use, but it is an example of something that could be shared if we needed to.
So, since we're talking about shared services, back to 624510. So we buy all of our chemicals through the North Bay Shared Service Pool. Do all the other treatment plants in the valley do the same? So we're already
believe so.
sharing that
Yes.
cost? Okay.
Yes.
Because there's been some
Yes.
discussion about that in terms of shared services, so that's very useful information. And so, is there any, every time I hear, so this is just the North Bay, so we're not really, is it Sonoma as well? How far does it go? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it does include Sonoma. It does include the bigger
Okay, so it's a
agencies.
pretty big
It's a
pool
big
to
pool,
really
yes.
bring the cost down probably as much as we can
Yes.
with those.
Yes.
All right, great. That's good information. Thank you very much. Councilmember Tripp?
Before we leave water, I wanted to go back and just ask John, at one point I remember hearing, which I thought was a really good idea, about, in terms of drought and emergency, building a storage tank, 1 million-gallon storage tank, I think. Was that kind of just an idea, or is that something that we could realistically consider, or maybe what I'm asking is what the status of that thought was?
So that is a project that we are still pursuing. Okay. It's not in this coming fiscal year's capital improvement program. It's in, I can't remember which year, but a couple years out.
Okay.
Right.
It is a project to build plus or minus 1 million-gallon water storage tank at the pump station location. There's physical room to build it. 1 million gallons is approximately 3 days of domestic use, not counting irrigation. And so it would be a great asset if the town could do that in the event we had some sort of occurrence that caused us not to have Rector water and or Napa water, and we would have a 3-day supply, so we could be solely. We have been working on grant applications for that funding.
Okay.
And are actively pursuing a grant.
Just in round numbers, what is the cost? Just in
5
round
million.
numbers.
We budgeted 5 million, and it's 5 years out, and we're also assuming 50% grant funding and 50% to the customers.
So the total cost would be 10 million?
No, the total cost is 5
okay,
million.
but we'd pay half.
So
Got
we're
it.
hoping for a grant for half of the 5 million for a 3-day supply. And, maybe something magical will happen and we could get 2 of them, have 6 days of water.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That is really it for water and wastewater, if there aren't any other questions.
It's a fascinating topic. It's got to be more questions here, so No, seeing none. All right. And just an FYI, what I do here is that when the public utilities new person, Jeremy, gets up, I don't know his last name, at the Veterans Home, that is the first project they're going to work on up at the dam, is creating a new valve and a way to, I think that came from water audit lawsuit. Good thing we got out of that one. Thank you, Gary Bell, wherever you are. And they will be also looking at their leaking sewer system, but I think the first priority, if I recall correctly, is really their steam. They still run a lot of the buildings on steam, and if you ever drive around the Veterans Home, you see a lot of steam coming up out of the street. So their pipes that deliver energy, they're also leaking. So I think that's going to be a higher priority, but they weren't sure. So it's on their radar, and it will all be costly. Yes, Councilmember McKee Can't.
Well, saying that will be costly repairs on their half, does that circle back to what Pam asked, or Councilmember Reeves asked, about us sharing costs of repairs there?
Not for the wastewater system. So
Okay,
just the
specifically.
cost of projects for our responsibility is the water
water.
delivery system. Yeah.
Okay. And then when I was reviewing this, I know I saw more about the reclaimed water, and I was still circling back to the leak that we have across by the river. Where do those repairs fit into this budget?
That's in Fund 63.
63, okay.
So I think in the project details for Fund 63, you'll see that there as WW0042, the emergency recycled water transmission repair, main repair.
So that's progressing, and
Yes.
I have a solution? Okay.
Well, we're working on the temporary solution, and the engineer has been,
Plan B.
we're on Plan B for
the
the temporary
Plan B,
solution, but
okay.
in the meantime, both our regulatory consultant has been working full speed ahead on both solutions, the temporary and the permanent, and our engineering consultant is already been actively working with their geotechnical consultant and developing the alternatives for the final repair.
Awesome, thank you.
Hopefully paid for by insurance, so
Yeah, I saw the $1 million.
that will be good.
Excuse me,
Okay.
Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Just one more. Last question about looking at Fund 61 and Department 4507, Water Utility Purchase and Conservation. I was just was going to ask you at our June meeting, but in terms of your 23-24 goals and objectives to continue community outreach based on water conservation, I guess I would like to see maybe at the beginning of our fiscal year, if you could do a look back for the whole year in terms of where we were at in terms of water use, and maybe as part of just a plan moving forward with in the next fiscal year, that quarterly you give us reports. At some point, even though our water supply from Rector and Calvet has moved from 400 to 500, there's some number that kind of makes sense that we should be trying to target as we move through the year, so the community recognizes we don't really want to go over 500 acre feet, that if we could get quarterly reports, that would be good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we all done? Councilmember Tripp, you have a last
I
comment?
just, to follow up on what Council Member Vice Mayor just said, I think you just did a really excellent job on the whole water conservation issue this year. Every report was great, getting all those people onto Eye on Water. There was a lot that went into it. We just saw the good results. So I really want to thank you. And also the Deputy Public Works Manager who worked on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to
Okay.
move on to final fiscal policy review?
Yes, agenda item 6D. So there are 9 policies that were included in the materials. The financial policies, the investment policy, the use of long-term debt policy, OPEB funding policy, OPEB trust fund investment guidelines policy, the fund balance policy, water and wastewater utility enterprise fund rate philosophy, use of drought water reserve bank policy, which we touched on a little earlier, and then the new use of water wastewater utility enterprise capital project restricted fund policy. So staff really focused on the fund balance policy. These encompass the two reserves that we talk about quite often, the Committed for Emergencies and the Revenue Stabilization Fund. So the Committed for Emergencies, the policy sets the minimum funding target at 20% of general fund expenditures. As we've touched on, the proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24 reflects a balance in the Committed for Emergencies Fund of over $2.8 million, which is approximately 25% of general fund expenditures. So we are meeting and exceeding that policy minimum, and we have suggested in the past that council could choose to increase that target to 25% if desired, since we are there at this time. The assigned for budget contingencies target is set at 5% of general fund expenditures, and that is reflected in the general fund summary as $571,167. And the assigned for legal contingencies reserve currently is set at $200,000, but based on prior budget workshops where we expressed that there could be an increased need for the town attorney in the next fiscal year, council did direct staff to increase that reserve to $250,000, an increase of $50,000. So that will be reflected in the policy going forward for 23-24. And then the Revenue Stabilization Fund is set at a minimum of 25% of transient occupancy tax revenue budget. The $2.8 million reflected as estimated fund balance for 23-24 is about 37% of budgeted TOT revenue. So again, we see capacity for council to increase that minimum target to 30% if desired, since we are meeting that and exceeding that at this point. And also, we did meet with the town auditors, and it would be a decision for council to make regarding this revenue stabilization fund. If we want to continue to call it a stabilization fund, it would need to be committed by resolution for a specific purpose. So, for example, if town council came up with some criteria of when would we use this, for example, with COVID, when we lost 30% of TOT, expected TOT revenues, then that would maybe kick in use of revenue stabilization. Or if it were a certain number of hotels, of the total hotels were offline, we could kick in use of revenue stabilization. So that would really commit it to a specific purpose and make it a little bit more restricted, a little bit less available, because use of it would have to come from another resolution to release those funds. The other option is to change the name slightly, call it something similar to unanticipated tourism revenue deficits, which would leave it in a more unassigned category, which provides easier access if council desires, and takes away that extra layer of committing it to just a certain purpose. So we would want to know what council feels would be the best approach for that fund.
I'm just going to start out with some general comments, some history here as well. When I first started on the council, we had $300,000 in the bank. That was it. So over time, as we really saw more hotels come online, our TOT really improving, the council made a lot of decisions to start improving our reserves. So we started out with one, I can't remember the name, which one it was. We put some money away. And then we had a little more money, so we realized that maybe we should have reserves for this area and that area. So we do have a lot of, and I always call them buckets. We do have a lot of different buckets with a lot of different names. And as we've had more money, we've had these types of discussions. I think I kind of would like to have a big global discussion and probably bring in maybe a financial advisor to really evaluate, what is a good plan? How much do we really need and why? And our needs are pretty unique, probably not, solely unique, but they're unique because we rely so much on tourism. So versus, maybe having more stable operating revenues because, like many cities, they rely on property taxes. So someone who could really come in, take a real look at, you need X amount of operating, whatever that number is. And then that way, we could really look at all these pieces we have and make probably better decisions. Do we need 2 big buckets? Should we really break them out? What should we call them? How much should go in each? Because now I think we're at that point where we can really have those kind of comprehensive global discussions that, because right now, do I go from 20 to 25%? I can't give a justification anymore. These numbers were kind of minimal and went to a lot of different areas. So I think it's really wonderful that we're in this great situation that we can really have this big discussion, more global, and really inform us on where we really need to go. So if we decide to do that in the next, let's say, just 6 months, picking a number, could we then come back and revisit these? Anyway, that's just my thought. Happy to hear from anybody else. Councilmember Reeves.
I absolutely support that idea. I think we do need to have a big discussion about what would we do in an emergency and how would this money be allocated in the correct way, and we'd have to establish what is an essential service and how would we deliver that in an emergency. And I think if we can have those discussions before we talk about how much is appropriate, that would be really, really helpful in the long term. And I would like to sort of fold into that other discussions about what our priorities are for policies around developing funds and what that can be used for.
Okay, thank you.
I'm in agreement. I think if the last few years have taught us anything, whether it's been wildfires that were out of the blue in 2017, we hadn't seen anything like it, whether COVID or some other pandemic, we definitely need to have reserves. And to me, putting parameters and limitations on how and when we can use them seems a little risky. So stepping back, having some financial analyst that on a municipal level that can give us some wise advice, and also maybe a new town manager that is coming in with a fresh set of eyes, makes sense to me. I don't want to limit being able to access funds because we didn't know that there was going to be some other imminent danger coming across.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and that way
we are vulnerable.
we won't
with
be
TOT.
bumping up against, what Celia has to deal with is like this name of the fund and, what it's used for. And there's always that earthquake fund. We don't have one of those yet either. But
Or
anyway.
a Rector Dam failure
Yes.
fund. I mean,
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Tripp, thoughts?
I agree completely with the concept that we kind of step back and look at it in total, and kind of think of 2 goals. One is some amount of structure, but then, as Councilmember McKee Cant said, we don't want to get so much structure that we hem ourselves in. My only comment is, having spent, 18 years in risk management, part of it is the money part, so I definitely think a financial advisor is helpful. But I would also, figuring out what we want to cover, sort of what Pam said, what are the necessary services, what are the expenses we need in various scenarios. I'm not sure that's a financial advisor, so that's my only thought, that we get somebody who has some, however we go about it, there's different people with different expertise, but it could be the financial side, but also the operational side. What are the kind of costs that we need to cover? So that's my only other comment, that we give some thought to who we would ask for advice. And then I do think the new town manager would be a really helpful voice in all this. But I support what you were saying, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
I don't have really anything to add other than I support that. I think council over the past years have made good decisions to set up reserves, but at some point we have to find out, we need to really understand the purpose, because if we're trying to make our community more resilient, then we should know how much we need to save, and we should then also know what we maybe can use to improve our infrastructure and anything that will allow us to get through an emergency. I also agree with Councilmember Reeves that I'd like at the same time for us to talk about, to have an opportunity for this financial, if we have a financial advisor come work with the town, that we look at our investment policies, looking at the authorized investments and limitations on investment, this list of 12 investing options. I think it's probably a good time for that to be reviewed as well.
And some of those, such as our trust fund for the PERS, UAL, as well as the OPEB, I saw, I think when we talked about it earlier, we've just now reached that 5 million mark. So before setting up that trust, we had to have it managed by the management company that holds that trust. We don't anymore. I'm not saying we want to do it here, but to have that discussion, because we now have the ability, now that we've passed the $5 million mark in those funds, and I don't think that's changed, as I remember, because I've been on those past committees, that to the Vice Mayor's point, I think at least in those two, really decide what's the best way forward. We've got anybody who can figure out this crazy economy and which way it's going up and down, and it's just really crazy out there right now. So I think that would be good, and that could probably help us then figure out, the other ones, we can't really manage them very much because we're really limited because, and maybe Celia can speak to this, because these are municipal funds, we can't make much money, but we don't lose much money either. So but some of those other trust funds were a little more flexible in terms of really financial policy, what we're going to invest in and what we're not. And I hope we get somebody who isn't managing some of the state funds right now. They got a little too out there with can't do this and you can't do that, and all that's crashing. So a little more somebody who really understands real numbers and doesn't really get into socially engineering what we buy and what we sell and when we do that. So
We do work with Columbia Capital as the town's financial advisor, so I
Right.
could definitely reach out to them and see what kind of services they provide in connection with these.
okay, but yeah, I think also waiting for our new town manager to be part of this whole process too. But any information you want to have available for that is certainly fine. So, and sounds like we're in total agreement. We're really not trying to not do the hard work here. We're trying to do it smart. So, if that's okay with it, Councilmember Reeves.
I just wanted to mention that at this point, with a financial advisor or someone to advise us on policy, that we could also look at our investment strategy to make sure that we are using socially responsible and environmentally responsible investment instruments so that we feel like making money is a positive through our investments rather than just making money because we can.
And to that, we can certainly, I'd be happy to take a look at that, but I would like to see socially responsible investments, how much money you make versus just making as much money as you can, and then we can make a
Yeah.
decision about that. Because there's lots of schools of thought and lots of data out there now, so let's be thorough about that too. Councilmember Tripp.
I just wondered if Celia could just briefly describe, and I'm going to say it in layman's terms, but I take it to be a pool of money that gets managed for local agencies. There's an abbreviation for it.
LAIF,
Oh, like,
Yeah, and
Local Agency Investment Fund.
Right, and so that's sort of our default, right? For large amounts of funds that we're not going to be using in the near term.
Correct. That's where the bulk of our cash is kept, is in LAIF. I think right now it's at 2.8%, so it's a little bit lower maybe than it could be in different circumstances. But we did also, just as a reminder, build into the finance department budget a contract for investment management services.
okay.
And Columbia Capital was at the forethought of our mind for those services. So I think that part of this could be part of that conversation to go along with that contract, so that they look at not only our cash, where is our cash kept, but what about our other funds that we have, our other trusts.
So the other funds, putting aside the two trusts, because those are separate
Right.
deal, are basically with LEAF right
LEAF.
now. Okay,
LEAF,
because
yes.
I actually, this is just me personally, I feel really good about that because I've never really looked into it, but my guess is they have some pretty stringent policies on what are appropriate investment vehicles and all, because it's public money. So,
Very secure, and it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
liquid.
So I feel, and so like the reserves that we were talking about, the $2 million reserve for drought, that as an example is with LEAF.
Correct.
Okay, so what portion would like Columbia Capital be managing? Or do they really manage anything
They
of
don't.
substance right now?
Columbia Capital doesn't manage anything at this point. It's
Okay,
all-
so it'd be a future.
Correct. That would
Okay.
be a next fiscal year initiative.
Okay, and then the trusts, the OPEB and the UAAL are managed by the trust companies.
Yes, I think
Okay.
it is Highmark,
Okay.
who works along with PARS in the
Okay.
PARS Trust.
And my guess is they have kind of the widows and orphans philosophy, in the sense of very secure investments and instruments, or not? Or do we tell them how to invest it? I guess that would be my question. Do we tell them, or do they basically do it?
I believe that the town has told them what we prefer as far as
Okay.
investment strategy. I think that was just changed in recent years.
Okay.
And that is actually something that we were going to bring as a council item,
Okay.
is some information from PARS, a
Okay.
representative from PARS, to present our investment strategy and how things have been going with the two trust funds. So that is something that we can put on a future agenda
Okay,
for just
yeah,
more
and I wasn't
education.
meaning to quiz you. I was just trying to, in my own mind, figure out who's managing what. So the bulk of it is with LEAF, and
Correct.
that's a good plan. Okay, thank you.
But there's a separate entity that we've used to put out for new, reducing our payment, like on the community center, and there's another, any of our big debt services that, you know, have helped us significantly refinance that group out of,
That was through Columbia Capital.
yeah.
Yes.
So we have used them
We
for
have.
that purpose.
Yes.
Not necessarily for investing before, but they've been very helpful in finding us much lower interest rates that have significantly brought down that debt, because that's why we're only an AA minus instead of AAA, is because our debt is not inconsequential compared to the size of our town. So there's that piece to the whole thing as well. And inflation is going down, but, you know, I hear talk about deflation. So just when I think we have a low interest rate, who knows? So I think all of that is probably going to be the big picture, that will probably be comprehensively looking at all of that. So anyway, any other comments, final thoughts, closing remarks? Councilmember McKee Cant.
Of when these policies were written and adopted. How long did these go back?
It should say in the policies themselves, I think some of them say adopted by resolution, and then the year, for example, so the OPEB funding policy that I just turned to was adopted June 17th, 2014,
Okay.
by resolution 3188-14.
Thank you.
But then some of them have newer resolutions because we changed some of the policy.
Correct, yes.
We went from 20 to 25, And then some of them are older and younger because now we had extra money and realized that, well, maybe we really should have a reserve fund for this. So we created that. So there's been a lot of iterations based on how much money we had, how much
I'm
we
like
had
looking
in
at the
there.
investment policy.
And some of them, we actually just put in a minimum because, quite frankly, we couldn't decide, should it be 25% or 30%? So we just left it a minimum of. So that way we weren't restricted to put more in. So each one had kind of a bit of a life of its own and, kind of unique reasons. And some got changed and some were original, so.
And that's a great point, that the adopted date might not be reflective of when it was established, but when it was last amended,
Updated, yeah.
updated.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll look more into the investment policy, Councilmember McKee
Yeah,
can't,
but it
to
just-
find out when that was established.
Things have changed in that industry, so thank you.
Okay, so we're ready for any last, I'll let people flip around a little bit more. Any last, before we move into final general fund summary review, any,
If I could just review one last time, Mayor, no changes to the percentages in the policies, correct? And
not at this time.
we are
That's what we're saying.
leaving, council would like to leave the revenue stabilization as more of an unassigned.
When is Gatsby coming in? We want to get that answered for you, so they're not,
So that's not something that's coming, that's something that's already established. So the use of the stabilization name really needs to be tied to something more committed, more purposeful. If it doesn't have that level, then it would be an unassigned category and need to have a retitling. So
so
we
you need that
would-
action today.
Correct, please.
So what's the easiest thing for us to do on a temporary basis that's going to,
Retitle.
For the fiscal year 23-24 budget, we would retitle it the Unanticipated Tourism Revenue Deficits Fund.
I would
okay,
like to make a
I need
motion.
to write that down. Hold on. What's that called again?
Unanticipated Tourism Revenue Deficits.
Tourism.
Taken the mayor's challenge personally to
Deficit.
keep things moving, so maybe I'll make a motion that we.
Hey, 1 second, just
Oh.
1 second. Unexpected, unanticipated.
You have to come up with an acronym.
That's exactly what I was working for.
RD.
It's a mouthful, for
And
sure.
has a fund after deficit?
Yes.
Unanticipated tourism deficit fund.
Tourism,
So- and that-
tourism Revenue Deficits Fund.
And so we would do that, make that change by a resolution?
No,
No?
because this fund has not been established by resolution, so it
Okay.
could be, so I guess correction, that would, in the budget resolution,
Okay.
it would be probably referenced there in that resolution that this fund was retitled.
So that
Because
would,
it
we
would
would
be by
officially do that
budget
on
resolution.
June the 6th.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So is everybody clear how that's going to work? Okay, good. I think you probably have enough head shaking to go ahead and
Okay.
unanticipated tourism deficit fund will be the new name for the revenue stabilization fund in a, we'll see that in the resolution in the budget as well.
Tourism
Revenue
Deficit.
revenue, you got to get revenue
deficits.
right there.
I
Gotta get that part in there.
Revenue, okay, got it.
It's a mouthful.
And that's. It's going to change. As soon as we get this changed,
Yeah.
it will be changing after that, I guarantee you.
course.
So, all right. So, are we ready to move on to summary? When no one looks at me, that always says yes. Oh, Vice Mayor.
Summary, if it means just general, maybe.
It's
after
6E.
4 meetings,
6E.
reviewing back, and maybe offering a suggestion for funding that we talked about at the last meeting. And for me, it would be the question of the small projects grant program to set aside some money in that fund, which we currently have 0 for 23-24. Put in there for some type of small project grant program or pay it forward program that the council could determine at at some point during this fiscal year and spend it or not, but to have funds available to do that. So again, just to, I'm asking council maybe to set aside some money in the 23-24 budget for small project grant program, pay it forward funds, something that would allow us this year to consider funding nonprofits that are doing good work for the community. And that's my hope to, if this is a part of the general fund summary review, that would be one of my initiatives I'd like for us to talk about.
Can you just hold that officially? Can we open up the staff report on item 6E, which will be part of that discussion? Let Celia get started, and then,
Great,
then
thank
we'll
you.
do that then. Okay, Celia, you're on.
Slide, please. Okay, so changes incorporated from the last budget workshop on May 18th. We did add to Fund 50 PK 0033 for a shade structure at North Park at a cost of $150,000. And there was discussion about new chairs for council members, and we do think that we have capacity to accommodate that in the current fiscal year. So staff has already reached out to our furniture company to try and get that in the works sooner rather than later. Next slide. Okay, so incorporating all changes from the two budget workshops, this is the final proposed general fund budget summary. So, of course, this would flex a little bit if today council decided that they wanted to add a couple things or change a couple things. Revenues and expenditures: $13.4 million in revenue, 11.4 million in expenditures, and then 1.7 million in transfers. So that would leave an excess of 294,000, and so this revenue is reflective of the increased property tax that we bumped up from 2.18 to 2.44 based on current year activity. It is also reflective of the $7.775 million in TOT estimated revenue. So we did say that at this meeting we would let council know kind of what we are seeing as far as TOT collections in the current fiscal year. And we are collecting for the month of April at this point, and it is looking very strong that we will end this current fiscal year at about 7.8 or maybe even higher. So staff still feels comfortable with the 7.775 projection for next fiscal year, but if council would like to be a bit more conservative, we can at this point bump that back. So we would look to council for direction on that. And that would, of course, change the excess of $294,000. If we bring it down a couple $100,000, we may need to revise some of the proposed transfers. For example, maybe into the facility replacement, repair and replacement fund, or the fleet and tools replacement fund. Those may need to be revised based on what council's direction is with the TOT projection.
So I have a question. When do you do your transfers? You don't do them all at once.
Correct.
Okay, so when are those scheduled? I'm trying to figure out if we have time to make that decision based on, let's kind of see how we kind of end up here.
I'm sorry, Mayor, are you asking about the transfers in the current fiscal year or for next fiscal year?
The current transfers that would be affected if we be more conservative on our TOT estimate.
So those would be the 23-24 transfers.
Right.
So if council today asked that staff lower the projected TOT, we would at that point lower the transfers that are in the proposed budget. So June 6th, you would see that manifest in the final general fund summary.
So it would be pretty much immediate when,
Yes.
when you did those.
Yes.
That was kind of my question as we
So in
kind of
essence, we
consider
would,
this. Councilmember Tripp.
excuse me, I'm sorry. In essence, we would be reducing the budget to meet a reduced revenue projection.
Correct. We would
And-
reduce the anticipated revenue
Right.
and then also reduce some of the planned transfers.
Right. So just to recap, to make sure I understood, we're projecting 7.75 for next year.
Correct.
And based to date, on April, and I know there's a lag, you're projecting this year should be 7 point, I mean, I know it's an estimate, but looks like 7.8.
We're fairly confident we will at least meet
At least.
7.8.
At least. Okay, so my thought is, having been through the whole budget, and would be not to go back and start reducing transfers, especially since it looks like we're not, if not absolutely certain, it looks like we will have the 7.75. Plus, we still have, when all the books are closed, the 5% contingency reserve that might be available if we needed it, as well as some other unassigned funds, which my understanding is that whole issue kind of comes to the front typically in January. I think a mid-budget kind of review issue, or
December, you're referring to the unassigned fund balance
Right,
from
right.
the prior year? Yes, that
Yeah.
will come to council in December.
okay. So my only point being that there will be a second look if something really untoward occurred. That's my only point, as opposed to readjusting the budget now, because it looks like 7.75 is a realistic number. So anyway, my vote would be not to reduce the budget based on reduced revenue projections. That would be my thought.
Councilmember Reeves, thoughts?
I agree with Councilmember Tripp. I think that the finance department always works very conservatively, and it feels like the whole budget is set up to have numerous fail-safe built into it, and I feel like it's not a huge leap to say 7.75 is a good number.
Councilmember Mickey Cant, thoughts?
I'm going to be in agreement too. I mean, I feel like we've kind of dragged our heels. As we dragged our heels to get a perspective of this 2023 year end. And I mean, Lord willing, we won't have any disasters, but I know that steadily along, these projections have been accurate and coming in even over it. So I'm going to go in with the full confidence.
Vice Mayor, thoughts?
I agree. And other than having the opportunity to assign unassigned fund balances, we're always at January or at some point doing a mid-year review, in which case we can make adjustments at that time as well. Thank
Correct.
you.
Yeah, and I'm just, looking back to our, actuals in 21, 22, still during COVID. TOT was 9.8. We had just surprising amounts of unassigned fund balance. So I do, it's, your suggestion is certainly, I'm not taking it lightly. I do know there's a lot of new hotels, big hotels going in, and they're up and running in Calistoga. We see that. Napa, we saw some of our businesses go down there. We see their increased tourism. Some of their residents are complaining, like ours did years and years ago. Luckily, we're kind of got that kind of behind us. Unfortunately, other cities do not. So I think it's a very good question. I think we've really got to keep our eye on the ball here, because we are seeing a lot of increase throughout the valley. We were leading by a long shot for a long time. So again, I think that this is still a conservative number based on kind of what we saw last year, and we'll probably exceed that again, not to the degree necessarily that we exceeded it the year before. But so I'm fine with leaving it there, but I really appreciate you asking us the question. So sounds like we're up. Councilmember Reeves.
Mayor, just along the lines of your evaluation of what's happening in the valley in general, I think it sort of brings us to the point of maybe Yountville needs to consider the idea again of a business and community development program, because we can't do what we did before unless we have bright ideas and more action towards future proofing Yountville. I think we can't rely on what we've done before. We have to think up some new stuff. So I think in the upcoming months that hopefully we could have a few discussions about what that might look like.
And yeah, I think having, you know, the big broader discussion about how much money do we really need in reserves and what are they going to be for, I think that we're going to have a holistic picture of our general finances and, you know, where are we going and why, and, you know, probably action items about that. So I think it's almost like a mini financial general plan, if you will. We really haven't done that before, and I think there's lots of reasons that it's probably time to take a look at that. So we'll just kind of see what falls out and where we go, and get some experts in here to help us out with the plan. So, Councilmember McKee Kent.
Just as a follow-up to Councilmember Reeves, the second line of our financial policies says efforts to ensure continued reliability and revenue sources must be maintained and to develop and diversify other revenue sources. So, I mean, this was stated back when this was first written, and whatever we can do. And I've been meeting with all the hotels, and they all say we're shy midweek. I mean, we may be making our revenue and our rates are stabilized for weekends, but we're dragging midweek. So anything we can do to help them and to diversify our businesses is going to be an asset.
Sounds like we're all in agreement. Councilmember Tripp.
Yeah, I agree with what the two previous council members said. You know, it's kind of a fundamental risk concept. If you can avoid it, you try not to have all your eggs in one basket. And we have so many eggs in the hotel basket. And then the other thing, which I'm not sure there's much we could do about it, but even that basket is very concentrated because all those eggs are with one or two entities. So I do think a group to specifically look at diversification or whatever the possibilities might be so that we have kind of an economic stability plan over the long haul would be a really good idea.
Sounds like staff is busy writing. You've got plenty of thoughts from the council. So
Thank you.
anything else on our...
There are a few more slides. Just a closer look at the transfers. Of course, we talked about the transfers into the repair and replacement funds, sizable transfer into capital projects fund that is to help support planned projects and provide any matching funds for grants that may be required, and then covering our debt service as needed and subsidizing the low-income resident utility program. Next slide, please. And this is the current snapshot of fund balance allocations. So as previously mentioned, the assigned for budget contingencies at about $571,000. We did increase the legal contingencies to $250,000. We have $3.6 million available for affordable housing opportunities should they arise. And unassigned fund balance is projected to be over $1.5 million for fiscal year 23-24. And of course, that is just a projection. We will know the true number for the current fiscal year 22-23 in December, as we just talked about. And so again, just an estimate. But it is a healthy estimate, and it's a good amount of money. So just a little bit of padding for us if needed. And then last,
I had one question,
go ahead.
Mayor. For the assigned for budget contingencies, that's 5% of
General fund expenditures.
of general fund expenditures. I don't want to put you on the spot, Director King, but I mean generally over the last 5 to 8, 9 years, is our dipping into that fund been, I mean, have we dipped into it over 10% or 20% of those funds, or has it just been there as a part of policy?
It's been there as a part of policy. quite a few years, we did not use it at all. I think in the last 2 fiscal years, we have used it just slightly. I think this current year, as you see, we started with 521, and we still have a balance of 486. That may change slightly with an upcoming budget adjustment request at a future agenda. But as you can see, for the most part, we do not need to use that. And so that is available if needed to, in an emergency. But we typically don't have to use it. There is also the town manager contingency of $45,000 that can sometimes help the smaller things if we come across something smaller. And this is for the bigger items that we, fortunately, council has helped us to budget very accurately and precisely, and we typically can cover everything we need unless something unexpected comes up or costs arise that we didn't anticipate. For example, chemicals and utility costs, PG&E rates, things of that nature.
Thank you.
Don't forget fire.
And fire, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So this last slide is just a total expenditure budget summary. So our total budget for the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget is $26.4 million. Of that, it's kind of a split 66-34 between operating and capital. So 66% is operating, 34% is capital, and you can see it listed out by fund and also kind of by category. So all the special revenue funds, the debt service funds, water, wastewater, capital, and general fund. So that's just kind of a nice way to see everything on one page for expenditures. It's very small. I apologize.
Are you going to give us this slide?
I will send the whole PowerPoint to the council. Yes.
I can't even possibly begin to see that.
And this is much easier to see on the online budget. If you pull up the online budget book, it's much bigger, much easier to read.
Mayor, I have a question. Generally, when we're all finished, will you create a few of these print documents or?
Yes, we have been trying to reduce the number of printed budgets that we have available since we do have the online budget book, but we do have one for an office copy, one for a library copy, and we can print a couple extra for council if desired.
Yeah, I would like a copy, please.
Sure.
I would too, as well. It's just to be able, I know the online system is just so amazing, the work that it does to look at that and the charts and graphs that pop up, but it's nice to be able to sit down with a cup of tea and read your budget.
Definitely. I do the same.
If it helps, we won't need the shiny cover. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, it has to have a nice shiny cover.
And I'll
want
just
it to
make
be
a
pretty.
prediction. Over the years, you'll probably get more used to the online
Yeah.
stuff too. So anyway.
All right, last slide is the budget adoption next steps. So between now and the agenda deadline, staff will be working on any necessary corrections, looking for typos, fact-checking, and formatting of the actual budget pages. And we will bring the finalized proposed document to the Town Council on June 6th. And as we just spoke about, we have the online budget book that is accessible from the website, and we will have a printed version in PDF format that will also be on the website. So that will be the printed book in PDF form, so you can bring that up on your iPad.
Good too.
Yes.
That's nice.
Yeah. And that is all of staff information.
All right. So any more questions from us?
There was, if we wanted to go back to Vice Mayor's question about the small project grants or the Pay It Forward program, I think that was the only outstanding thing we had not talked about.
And did you have an idea? I mean,
Yeah.
because just a little more history. We used to have that. I think it was about 25,000. We actually had a subcommittee really review those, and then the subcommittee actually kind of came back, and we had it for several years, I think, and they really kind of came back, and there were fewer and fewer requests, but just and so we no longer had it, and that's really the long and short of it. So
Well, my experience was for pretty much most of the 8 years I was on the council from 97 to 2005, we had before the movie Pay It Forward or the concept, we had a projects budget where we asked nonprofits to present a presentation of what they were doing for the community, and we got a fair number of ones, and we had to make decisions, which sometimes we weren't providing their full requests, but it was beneficial for groups, all kinds of groups all over in Yountville and in the valley that were providing services to members. And so I would.
And so I was just talking about I think it was called the Happy Grants.
Happy Fund,
yeah.
right.
So it was different from the nonprofits.
Right.
That's what you're saying too.
I understand. You're right. I know in the near past there was the Happy Projects where there was a library. I know the town funded a couple projects in the community that the residents appreciated, and that's fine too. I would support that, but I think I think we have the funds available to be able to contribute to either small people that want to do small projects like that for the residents in the community, or for nonprofits that are coming out of COVID that need support, that do provide important services for the community, like news or the emergency women's shelter. And so I would propose that we set aside $40,000 for grant programs in the next fiscal year. I understand we don't have a plan for it right now, but we could put something together to potentially do in the spring of next year in terms of announcing a program. But I would like to be able to do that. I think it's a good investment for the community.
Councilmember Tripp?
I very much support that. There is a real need out there. We're very blessed in Yountville in terms of our revenue, but we do have members of the community who do use services from various nonprofits, as well as just nonprofits, as Eric said, who could use some additional assistance. So, and I liked the Pay It Forward plan or program as well. And I think it makes a certain amount of sense to kind of combine it into one, I don't want to say fund because it sounds too formal, but one budget item. So I would support that idea.
Councilmember McKee can't.
As a possible link to the community and listening to their voices and thoughts, years ago there was a program in Napa that was called 100 Women Who Care About Napa. I don't know if Samantha or anybody went to it, but it was it grew rapidly, and what would happen is they would invite a handful of nonprofits each quarter to present and their specific need, and everybody would have a ballot in their lanyard, and you had to buy in to be in this group and commit $100 each quarter. But I'm getting to a point where everybody had a vote and a say of who won the money for that quarter. And that would be a little complicated for us, but I would like to include the community and do some kind of workshop where there was voting, maybe for first, second, and third. So awarding, whether it's Molly's Angels or News, and in fact, News ran that program, could be also the voice of our community residents. Takes it off of our shoulders too. We're a pass-through.
And, it could also be part of the Community Foundation program as well, since we already have that set up. Maybe that's really what we're saying at this point, is, let's consider putting the money in the Community Foundation under a separate item, which we don't really have right now, because even if we put it in, we can always take it out if we decide we want to do it something else, but that might be a placeholder to put it. Councilmember Tripp?
That sounds like a reasonable thing, but I really resonated with what Councilmember McKee Cant said, and so if it was placed within the purview of the foundation, which has a board and all that, I would ask them respectfully to try to do it in a way that allowed members of the community to participate. So it would have to probably be a little different than maybe their normal structure of decision making. So that would be my only thought about that.
And it goes for specific needs, like news maybe needed one more staff member to cover nighttime shifts, or Molly's Angels maybe needed a new van. And so they came in and said, if we were awarded this, we would do X, Y, Z. And the next year they came in and said exactly the difference that that donation made within their organization.
Do you have info?
Oh, sorry.
I see that, Councilmember Tripp. Do we have information now to know if we did decide to put in the community foundation as a placeholder, or do we need more information before we make that decision?
I believe we would need more information before we made that decision.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I agree. I really like the idea of potentially. I think that our community foundation has a lot of opportunities to do a lot more. But right now, I guess I know the bylaws for the community foundation are very specific in terms of just processing application fees, and so I like the idea of somehow if it eventually becomes a part of a project funded that work within the community foundation, that would be great. But I think the short-term answer would be to put the money in a line item in community promotions and programs using the small projects grant program. So and then we could always move it to a community foundation program if it makes sense for that committee and their bylaws, and because we may have to work on their bylaws to have them actually be providing funds out to the community. So
And I would need to even review those bylaws before I understood it myself again. Is that a possible?
That would be a good placeholder to put it in the small projects grant program, and then it could be reassigned if council desired.
Okay, Councilmember Reeves.
Well, I was going to suggest exactly what Vice Mayor Knight said, is that in order to establish sort of the program, the council should be involved in that and then hand it off to whatever seems to be the right entity to carry it out. But I think trying to implement this kind of community building where maybe we don't have so many people participating in the budget process, but what fun and what kind of action you might get from the community if they were to be able to give away money. That would be a perfect community building kind of natural high for everyone, I think. So, yeah.
So we all in agreement for $40,000?
I'd like to make it 50. That's a nice round number.
50 is a
would
round
support
number? Everyone okay with that?
Yep.
All right, 50,000, and we know where it's going for now.
We do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other final comments from the council? If not, one more time, does staff need anything else from the council?
I think so.
Okay.
No, thank you. We're good.
With that, I am going to adjourn our meeting to Tuesday, June the 6th. The meeting starts at 3, but we will be raising the pride flag at 2 o'clock. So be here
2:30.
2:30. Okay. I wrote down some time I was going to be
Mayor,
here. So
could-
just a minute, let me finish. So we're going to raise the flag at 2:30, and then so I am going to just adjourn the meeting until Tuesday at June the 6th at 3. But the council and the community are all invited to our flag raising right out front of the community center. So before I ask for a motion and a second, Councilmember Tripp.
Could you just announce the Memorial Day, since you were announcing the flag raising? I probably can find it, but the Memorial Day activities in terms of the ones that you're involved in and the town is involved in?
I don't think the town's involved in directly any of them, but the George C. Yount Cemetery, our old historic Cemetery and Indian Burial Grounds. They have always had their memorial service at 1 p.m. on Sunday before Memorial Day.
Okay.
And then the Veterans Home always has their ceremony on Monday, Memorial Day, at 10 a.m.
And because I thought you said you were presenting at those. That's why I assumed the town was involved.
Yeah, no, I've just been asked by the Yountville Cemetery
Oh, okay.
Association, and I was asked by the Veterans Home.
Okay. Anyway, I was just explaining why I assumed that.
So at 10 a.m. on the 29th, it's at the cemetery, outside the cemetery. It's a beautiful program, and so I would encourage residents to attend if they can. It's difficult. You have to go up that hill. It is a small area, but it is a beautiful service.
Thank you.
So with that, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
I move we adjourn to our regular meeting on June 6th, 3 p.m.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Councilmember Reeves, a second by Councilmember Tripp. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Anybody opposed? No. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We finished the budget.
Great, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, great job. The reason we never use the contingency is you guys budget so well.